So at this stage in the assembly process, you've got all of the MDF parts assembled, and the main tower structure is built. The hoist house, the sand house, the hopper shed, and the hopper shed ramp are all assembled. And now we're ready to do a little bit of painting. And we want to get this paint on these items now, because everything that we add on to it later will be a different color, and it'll make it a lot more difficult to get into these structures and do any type of weathering. So what we're going to do is we're going to start out with just some very inexpensive craft paints that you can pick up at the craft store. Michael's, Pat Catan's, Hobby Lobby, any type of craft store like that will sell these paints. They typically sell for $2, $3. You're going to need a lot of this khaki tan color that we use for the base color on the entire coaling tower kit. This basically is going to go down as our foundation for the concrete color. And I've just taken some of this paint and stuck it on a scrap piece of cardboard, which I'll use to work off of, and we'll get started painting all of these structures. Now, in terms of the brush that you use for applying this khaki tan, at this stage in the game it really doesn't matter. I've just got an artist brush that I had laying around in one of my brush drawers, maybe about 1 inch wide. You can use something wider. There's a lot of material to cover on here. One thing that you do want to bear in mind when you're working on the coaling tower itself, you do have the potential to get some brush strokes in this acrylic paint, so you want to make sure that you do your final brush strokes side to side. This way it'll at least give a little bit of an illusion that, you know, they had forms on here when they poured this, and so your brush strokes want to go side to side, not diagonally and not up and down. And again, depending upon the how heavy a coat you put on this, you may get some brush strokes, you may not get any. But good rule of thumb is to go side to side on the sides of the coaling tower itself. We'll just go ahead and get started. There's a lot of surface area here to cover, and a couple things you want to be cognizant of is you want to try and keep the paint out of these laser cut rectangles. We have brackets that need to mount in there later on in the assembly process, and we really don't want to be fighting with having to dig paint out of those holes if at all possible. So we'll just go on and paint this, and it's possible that you may need 2 coats depending upon how light or how heavy you put it down. And painting the inside of the windows is not really important. Once the windows are put into the structure, you'll never see those sides, so it doesn't matter. But again, just a lot of surface area to cover with this khaki tan color. Get it all covered, and we'll come back and we'll start talking about how we can begin to weather this surface before we apply all of our walkways and ladder cages and all of the fixtures on it. So at this stage, we've managed to get our khaki tan put on the surface area of all our MDF structures. So completely covered all 4 sides of the main coaling tower. A couple areas of interest I want to point out is we definitely want to paint inside the roof that covers the bucket tramway. We want to paint the insides of the hoist line access hole here in the top tower. We also want to paint the underside of the slope sheets here in the bottom of the tower. Is it necessary to paint them? Maybe not, but there is a walkway that goes in here. There's a door and a window, and there is some rigging for the coal chutes that hangs down there. So you've got the paint out. It's inexpensive. It's only an extra 2 or 3 minutes to get that painted. Paint both sides here and then both slope sheets. And so we've got our legs painted, our main tower. Pretty much all of our other buildings, our hoist house has a coat of khaki tan I did not bother to paint the roof because we're going to make that a different color, but all four sides and the insides of the hoist access hole in the hoist house, you want to make sure you paint that. Got the hoist house painted. Our sand house is painted as well. We've got khaki tan on all four walls. Again, didn't bother to paint the roof. It'll be a different color. We painted our hopper shed, khaki tan. One thing I did do on all of these outbuildings is I did paint khaki tan up underneath the eaves just to make it a lot easier when we paint the roof a different color. We don't have that exposed MDF showing here. Didn't bother to paint the inside of the bottom of the roof of the hopper shed. You know, you're gonna have hopper cars in there. You're really never gonna see it. We are gonna go ahead and paint a different color on the roof after we do a little bit of weathering. And then finally the hopper shed ramp. Khaki tan on all four sides on the outside, on the top. I left the coal chute area unpainted. We'll go back in here. We'll paint that flat black so it gives the illusion of depth later on in the video. And at that point, or at this point, that's pretty much all we've got accomplished. We've got that khaki tan on there. Now the reason that we used acrylic paint is because we're going to go into our next treatment using some oil paint in a material called turpenoid, which is really just really refined turpentine. The turpenoid helps the oil paints dry quickly. Also lets those oil paints flow, and so it creates a really rich, deep color that you really cannot achieve with any other method. So we'll get into that shortly. Go ahead and get these prepared. Well, they are prepared at this point with the khaki tan on here. So I'll get prepared with the oil paints and the turpenoid, and we'll move into that step next. Before we get started with this step, I want to point out the paints and the materials that we're using. So we're using a material called odorless turpenoid, and you can really only find this at a craft store that sells art supplies. In the artist section, they'll have this, or in the paint section where they have the oil paints and brushes, you'll find that odorless turpenoid. Really great material to have on hand. The other thing that we use, I use Winsor & Newton oil colors. These are burnt sienna, which does a great job weathering that khaki tan to create some real depth on a flat surface. We'll also use ivory black later in the process, and also Payne's gray. And then the brush, we're using the same brush that we used to put the khaki tan on the structure, just a 1-inch wide soft bristle brush. You definitely want a soft bristle brush for this approach, or for this weathering technique. You don't want to have a lot of brush strokes in what we're doing. We want to be able to move the liquefied oil paints around evenly and not really leave any brush strokes behind. So without further ado, we'll put some odorless turpenoid in a small cup, and we'll get our oil paints on a piece of cardboard, and I'll show you how this weathering process, or how we start this weathering process. One thing that is important to note is that we painted our structure with acrylic paints. And the reason we did that is twofold. One, acrylic paint dries quickly. Two, it cleans up with water. But three, and most importantly, is it allows us to put this turpenoid all over that surface, and the turpenoid will have zero effect on that acrylic paint. Because that acrylic paint is water-based, we can move this turpenoid and these oil colors around without any fear of it pulling that base coat off. If you went and painted your structure with a oil-based or an enamel-based paint, I would really caution you against using this turpenoid and oil paint wash technique, because the turpenoid, after a few seconds on the surface, will really start to attack that base coat, and what it will end up doing is leaving the MDF exposed on the model, and it's really a look that you don't want to go for. So let's get ready, and we'll start the weathering or the wash process on our coaling tower. So I've got my turpenoid in the cup here, and it's just a plastic cup. Put a little bit of this burnt sienna oil paint on a scrap piece of cardboard. I've got a towel just to soak up some excess turpenoid if necessary. And we're going to go ahead and start with the hopper shed. So again, the process is really easy. Just dip your brush in the turpenoid and get a little bit of this oil paint on your brush. The great thing about this technique is if you go on too heavy, you can break it down really easily. So we'll start here. We're just going to kind of spread the color over this panel right here. As you can see, it's really heavy. So we'll just add a little turpenoid to the brush, and we'll spread this around. Now, right now I'm doing this flat for the purpose of the video. You're more than likely going to want to do this while the hopper shed is standing up, so that you get the effect of the discoloration running downward where gravity would pull it. But let's assume that this is just a little too heavy. This isn't what we want. So we just wipe our brush off, and we can pull that color off of the wall. And we just want, we don't really want it to look like rust. We want it to look more like just weathered concrete. You know, as concrete sits out in the weather, it does. It gets a gray appearance. It gets a tan, like a khaki style or khaki colored tan discoloration to it, and that's really what we're trying to represent here, or recreate rather. So that's not bad for creating a depth in there. Now we can go back and we can apply just a little bit of paint in certain places and create some runs in that background color. It's not really necessary to do that at this point because we're going to go ahead and dry brush this later, and the dry brushing will cover up a lot of that wash, but it'll also help keep that wash in the background to give it depth to that panel itself. And the other thing we want to do is we want to darken the corners, right? Because this is naturally where you'd have a shadow existing in the on the prototype rather. So the corners are always a good spot to put extra color or deeper color. So we'll stand this up so I can get a good flow of turpenoid down that crevice or corner, if you will. I'm just going to go in there with a little bit heavier paint. And get that effect in the corner. Now, okay, so we've gone a little too far there. So we just, again, add a little turpenoid to our brush, and we just take it away. Use the brush vertically to create some striations or some different color in there. The raised surfaces like this pilaster here, this is really going to become a really light tan color when we dry brush, because we'll pick up that top surface really well just out of the dry brushing process. So we just want to continue that on the entire structure itself. I'm going to go ahead and shut the camera off so I can get a better angle on this, and turn it back on when we get this done. You'll just see what this looks like. And this is a process that we want to apply to all the structures: the hopper ramp, the sand house, the hoist house, the coaling tower, and the hopper shed. So one of the things that we are going to do is the coaling tower itself. We're going to lay it on its side and apply this treatment, because again, we're looking for the horizontal effects of the wash, again, to give the illusion of forms for creating that concrete coaling tower. So, controlling the direction of the color and the runs and the streaks in the color will ultimately help affect the surface that we're trying to, otherwise flat surface that we're trying to give texture to. So we'll be back in just a moment. So I've added a couple additional colors to the wash. The two colors I've added are Van Dyke Brown, which is a dark brown color, and then Ivory Black, which is more of a jet black color. What I did is on the interior of the hopper shed, I just put a simple wash of this Ivory Black, and that's just to give the illusion of there being a lot of A, there being shadows inside the hopper shed, and B, all the coal dust that blows around in there when the hopper drops the coal down into our make-believe coal bunker that the bucket uses to hoist the coal up into the coaling tower. So one of the elements that I've created is just this this random concrete look. Obviously the track is going to sit on top of this, and it's totally your choice whether you want to ballast it or not. With it being concrete, typically would not have been ballasted. So what we're going to do is I'll show you how to do that technique on the other side. It's really quite simple. Again, we're just using Turpenoid, and I've got this Van Dyke Brown color, which I'll pull over here for you. So the way we start it is we just take our Turpenoid and we spread it on this entire surface area here. We want to just make sure it's a little bit wet with the Turpenoid. If we get it in other places, like say the sidewalks for instance, it makes no difference. Just spread it around. Again, we used acrylic paint, so Turpenoid will have no adverse reaction to the acrylic paint. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our Van Dyke Brown, just put a little bit on our brush with some Turpenoid on it, and we're just going to create a stipple effect. And we're just going to push the brush up and down, creating this this random pattern of brown. You can push the brown around if you want, get it all over the surface, inside, or suspended in that Turpenoid, and then go back and stipple the brush. Twist the brush as you're doing it so you don't get any repeated patterns. And when you're done, it creates that same random effect on the concrete surface. So we've got our sidewalks wet. So let's take a little bit of our Van Dyke Brown, get it on here, on our sidewalk, on both sides. The idea here is to get the wash down in the cracks so that those shadows are more pronounced when we come back and do a little bit of dry brushing. I don't know if you can see that with the light, but the brown runs into those cracks. We can do the same effect here, giving it just that stippled look. Same way. Your choice. You can, if you want to replicate a concrete that was raked with a stiff bristled broom, you simply take your brush and drag it this way to put the brush strokes in that Van Dyke Brown. And so you've got the direction of that color. If you want a different surface texture than what you have on where the track goes, we'll go ahead and match that up on this side. And don't be afraid when you're doing washes to bring in multiple colors. And we can take a little bit of this Ivory Black that we have here, just put a tiny bit on our brush, and come in with that in that stippled area, and just add a little bit more depth and color. And again, we're going to go back and dry brush this. So this is really just adding surface texture and color to to an otherwise flat surface that we're going to give a little bit of depth to. Same thing with the black on the bristles. We can put this into our sidewalks randomly. We don't want a repeated pattern. Anytime you look at a weathered structure and you see a repeated pattern, it looks pretty fake. And so we're looking for a little bit more realistic look on it. So this is the effect that we're doing to our hopper ramp. Once this sets up, we'll go ahead and treat the sides. We'll do it while it's sitting there so that the Turpenoid runs downward. So we get any types of streaks and striations in the concrete, for that. So here's the hopper shed. I did do a little bit of Van Dyke brown in the corners, and a little bit of the black wash that I put on the interior flowed over through some of the windows, so I've got some random streaks of black in there as well. And again, this is just creating depth and interest on that flat surface that we're going to go back and dry brush. We'll get the coaling tower out next, and I'll show you how we do that to create the illusion of concrete forms on that flat surface. And then we're also going to go ahead and do this wash on our hoist house and our sand house so that we can move on to the next step. Now, as I mentioned earlier, when we do the washes on the main coaling tower, we want to do it with the coaling tower on its side. And the reason for that is we want to be able to control the direction of the color, which, again, to replicate forms used to build this concrete coaling tower, we want them to be horizontal. So instead of putting it up on its side where the color is going to run this way, we're going to do it flat. It's going to take a little bit longer because you need about 20-25 minutes for that Turpenoid oil paint wash to dry completely to where you can handle it without smudging or affecting the color that's on there. So what we'll do is we'll start with just applying Turpenoid to this entire surface, and we just want to make it wet. This way we can get our oil colors to flow around, and we can control them a lot better than trying to brush them onto a dry surface. So again, just getting this color out here. Now, one thing to note, what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to put a wash on this sloped roof on all four sides. And the reason for that is we're going to go back and paint that a neutral gray in a little while, and then we'll dry brush it, and then we'll apply the wash to subdue some of the lighter colors that we apply when we're dry brushing. But we'll get to that later. So I've just got a nice coat of Turpenoid on the surface we're working on. And I'll also get it up here on the tower because that surface is flat, and we want to replicate the concrete there. So now what I'm going to do is take a little bit of this Van Dyke brown, just put that on the brush, and start the color. And I can brush this around, add color, remove color as necessary, but just want to get a somewhat even application of this color on the surface, and then we can go back and dress it up here in just a moment. And so the amount of color that you put on the wash is entirely up to you. Again, we're just showing you how we do it in the shop, how we achieve the look that we get when we build our towers. You don't have to follow this at all, obviously, but again, just nice even back and forth strokes in what would be horizontal for the structure itself when it's standing up. And again, we're not really looking for a repeating pattern. We do want a random look to this. So, you can put paint on, or oil paint heavier in some areas, lighter in others, and don't forget the legs. And like I said, you've got about 20 minutes to work with this Turpenoid before it really starts to set, and it makes it more difficult to move that oil paint around or change the way it looks. Anyway, we're going to go back and forth. One thing you do want to do is you want to start your brush stroke on the end and end it on the opposite end. You don't want to start in the middle, because you'll see that it's an obvious glaring error that you don't want to have come through. And we're just going to, like I said, just go with some horizontal lines in here. Put a little more color in some places, less in others. Just a random effect. And I'm sorry about the light. I'll stand this up here in a moment so you can see what it looks like. Another thing that you can do at this step is you can use a, I just got one of these 2-inch chip brushes. Has uneven bristles on the end. You can drag that across. Again, it puts more of that concrete texture into it, or I should say that give the illusion of the forms on the concrete. And let me just go ahead and do the top tower while we're here. So here's a good example of putting on too much color at one time. So it's really simple. We just go back with a somewhat drier brush, wipe that paint off. If you get it on the side, just rake it up so that when we flip it over and do that side, we're not working with colors that are going the wrong direction or heavier to one side or another. The other thing we can do, we can actually put turpenoid on the brush, take color away. And then we can take that chip brush and just get that horizontal striation look to it. And we're going to go ahead and let that Van Dyke brown set up. I may come back and do a little bit of the Payne's gray or a little bit of the burnt sienna, just to just give some depth and some different color variation to the that khaki tan surface. Let's give that about 20 minutes to set up, and I'll be right back. Okay, it's been about 20 minutes or so. So the turpenoid is set up with the oil paints. As you can see, I'm not able to rub this color off of here with my finger. A couple places. Whoops. Make a liar out of me. Nevertheless, at this point, the turpenoid and the Van Dyke brown's dry enough that we can go ahead and come back with a little bit of different color. So we're going to use the black, or the ivory black color. And I'm just going to do this really faint. Not a lot of strong color here. Just wet this down and just put a couple of streaks of black in this color, or in this area here, just to give it some interest. And also do it up here on the tower. Rather large streak there. And go ahead and take my chip brush and just brush that across. Blend that in. Sorry if my arm is filling up the screen there. And that again is just to give some interest to the area across the this larger area here. Turn it up so you can see it a little bit better without the glare. One thing that we do want to do during this wash is this area inside the cooling tower, the slope sheets. We want to use either that Payne's gray or the ivory black in there. And the reason for that is, your steam locomotives are coming through the ash and the smoke. More importantly, the smoke and the cinders are coming out of the stack. And they would typically collect up underneath those slope sheets. Once we get the cooling tower done, we can put a little bit of powder effect, some black powder here, or chalk rather, to give the illusion of soot on the cooling tower where the locomotives would run underneath. But at this point, we can either be done with the brown and the black, or if it's your preference, you can go ahead and put a little bit of burnt sienna in there as well. Again, I would suggest doing it very light, not real strong, just a couple streaks of that burnt sienna. Again, just to add some interest and some randomness to that khaki tan color. and then just smooth it out with the chip brush, just to smooth it around so it's not a real bold contrast on the surface. And put just a little bit here on the top tower, a little more, and brush that off. And so that's what we basically, you know, that's basically the effect we're trying to go for on this wash. And again, our colors go horizontally, and that's just to give the illusion of forms when they built the coaling tower. So we're gonna go ahead and flip this over and do the next side. Again, only doing the legs. We're not doing the sloped roof or the sloped roof on the bucket cover. We're just gonna do the flat wall surfaces. And again, it's really quite easy. We just start with our turpenoid wash, just straight turpenoid onto the surface. Get it all wet. Make sure we get our walls both inside and out on the bucket cover for the bucket roof. And again, we start with our Van Dyke brown, just a little bit of color on the brush, and start working that in a just in a random pattern horizontally. And then we'll go ahead and blend that in with our chip brush and repeat this process for all 4 sides of the tower. And again, this is just the first wash on the structure itself to give some depth to an otherwise flat surface. So instead of continuing to do this on screen and putting you to sleep, well, I'll go ahead and proceed to finish the rest of the tower in this manner, and we'll come back and we'll take a look at doing some dry brushing. One more time, the reason that we're doing these effects on the coaling tower now is because once we get all the walkways on here and the bucket rails, the counterweights, all of the detail parts, getting to this concrete surface becomes extremely more challenging. And so let's get this done now, and we can focus on putting the details on next. And those will actually weather up much easier than trying to do it with the entire structure completely assembled. So at this point, we've got the wash applied to all 4 sides of the main coaling tower. We also have the wash applied on the hopper shed ramp, the hopper shed, the sand house, as well as the hoist house, and just kind of give you an idea of what what effect we're going for on the wash. This is really just to provide a little bit of depth to an otherwise flat surface. So that's what the washes look like. I used a little Van Dyke brown and some black on the sand house. You see that it's got a pretty heavy coating of black down here on the bottom. This is just stuff that's going to add interest once we get the weathering done. So the coaling tower, I did put black, I'd say a moderate to heavy wash of black on the inside of the slope sheets and both sides of the wide walls. Also used a little bit of black and Van Dyke brown down here on the legs as well. This is typically the area of the coaling tower that's going to get probably see the most amount of use and dust, and so we want to darken that up a little bit. So what's going to happen next is we're going to well, first we need to put a coat of matte clear over top of our wash that we just applied. This matte clear enamel is going to do two things for us. One, it's going to seal up the oil wash so that when we go through here and dry brush, we don't pull any of that color off. And two, it's going to help just help accentuate the matte color or the flat, so that there's really no reflection of light or any type of sheen on the structures themselves. So we'll go ahead and spray that matte clear on there, and then we'll come in and we'll do a little bit of dry brushing with some acrylics, and I'll show you how that dry brushing technique will help to lighten this this surface, and also give you an entirely different effect on this flat surface. It'll give a little bit of depth and texture to it. And then once we wrap that up, we're going to go in and we're going to paint the roof areas on all three of those structures, and also on the coaling tower. Do a little bit of dry brush in there, another wash, seal it up, and then we'll move into painting all the detail parts. One additional comment I do want to add is, once you get this wash done, if you're not happy with something that you did on the wash, if maybe you've got some color that's too deep or too dark and you want to lighten it up, it's really quite simple to do it. Just take a shop towel or a paper towel, put some turpenoid on the end, and then just wipe across the surface, and you'll see that it'll start picking up some of that oil paint that you put on there. In between washes, takes about 20 minutes for the oil paint and turpenoid to dry. If you've ever worked with oil paints before, you know that if you don't use the turpenoid, they can take like upwards of 6 to 8 weeks to dry up completely. Whereas with the turpenoid, there's some type of chemical reaction there that helps that oil paint dry faster. So, like I said, if it's all dry and you're not happy with some areas, just a shop towel, a little bit of turpenoid on the end, and just wipe it across, and it'll pull that color up and lighten it up. What we've done here is we've created just a makeshift tack board, and this is just a piece of scrap cardboard with some masking tape turned upside down so the sticky side's facing up, and a couple pieces of tape just holding it on either end. And so what we've done is we've stuck on all of our windows, window frames, and doors and door frames on that sticky side up masking tape. And what we're going to do is we're going to head out in the shop and we're going to spray that with just some Rust-Oleum spruce green is the color that we're using. The color for this is in the instruction manual. What we're going to do is just put the green color on these doors and windows, and then we'll come back, hit them with some matte clear enamel, and then just do a real quick dry brush treatment on it. And this will allow us to put our doors and windows on our sand house, our hoist house, and our hopper shed, and then also have them prepared for the coaling tower as well when it comes time to put those on in the manual. So go out in the shop, spray that real quick, and we'll be right back. Now that our coat of matte clear enamel has been applied to our washed coaling tower surface, we're going to go ahead and start doing a little bit of dry brushing. So the materials that I'm using are these inexpensive acrylic craft paints. I've got 3 colors I've chosen. our base color, which is khaki tan, and then just a little bit of a different shade. It's fawn, and then the lighter shade is sand. And so basically what we've got is we've got our base coat of khaki tan, and we've made it a little bit darker with these washes. So we're going to start dry brushing with khaki tan, then we'll move to the fawn, and eventually we'll finish with the sand. And dry brushing is real simple. We basically put paint on the brush. We wipe off as much of the wet paint as possible so that just a tiny bit of paint resides on the bristles. Then we drag those bristles back and forth on the surface to just pick up, really pick up a little tiny bit of detail that exists on that flat surface. So that matte clear enamel that we put on helped to put a little bit of texture on that flat surface. So the brush that I'm going to use for this is one that I picked up at just a do-it-yourself store in the paint section. This is a 2-inch wide economy paintbrush for painting acrylics or enamels. About a medium resistance on the bristles. Bristles are even on the bottom, so that'll help with coverage on this large area. And when we dry brush, we're going to want to go back and forth this way. Again, just trying to give the illusion of those concrete forms in any type of shape in the concrete surface when they built this thing vertically. So we'll go ahead and get started. I've just got a doubled over shop towel here to wipe the paint off on. So we'll get some khaki tan on the brush and we'll wipe it off. About like so. Drag it across your fingers. It should just pick up your fingerprints if it's got the right load on it. And then we just drag it back and forth across the surface. Now you will get some areas where initially where it's coming off heavy, like you see there in the middle. That's okay. We're just looking to put that base color back on there over top of that oil wash that we applied. And we can go in both directions. Really what it's going to do is going to pick up a lot of color on the edges. Dry brushing is really good for that. What we want to do, we want to focus on the middle though. We want to try and get a little more depth of color in that flat surface. And just going side to side. You can do this when it's standing up as well. It's just a little more difficult from the camera angle to do that. And you can push hard on the brush to try and get that paint to stay on the surface. Again, we're not looking for any type of repeated pattern. We just want this to be random, as it were. That looks pretty good there, so we'll go ahead and flip it over and reload our brush and wipe it off. And again, same process, just dragging the brush across horizontally to leave some paint behind and pick up any details that we can. And again, just random color is really what we're looking for here. If it looks like it's going on too heavy, just wipe it down with your finger. You can take some of that paint off before it sets up. Go up and down here just to see if we can't get some better coverage of the color. There's no right or wrong way to do this. It's you know, whatever gives you the best result for what you're looking for. Now you'll notice that in the painting process, we did not paint the bucket rail supports, and we didn't paint the foundation either. That's because after we get this large concrete color done, we'll go back and paint those a different color and apply a different, well, same dry brushing technique with some different colors in a little while. But like I said earlier, this is a lot of concrete surface to cover, and it's a heck of a lot easier to do this before all of the really fine details are put on. So that's why we're doing this so early in the stage, or this early in the game, I should say. And we're just going to go ahead and repeat this process with the khaki tan, and then we'll go into the fawn, and then in the sand as well as our final color. And it may be necessary to come back with a little bit of antique white. Again, we want to basically start with a darker surface and then dry brush up to a lighter surface. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this up, and I'll be right back momentarily. So I've just completed the dry brushing using the three colors we talked about, the khaki tan, the fawn, and the sand. I also added a fourth color in there because I just thought it was a little bit too dark, and that was a light buttermilk is the name of the color, and you can see it really pronounced right here. Again, I'm looking for what I'm going for here is I'm creating depth in an otherwise flat surface. So we've got our base color of khaki tan, we've got a wash of some browns, a little bit of black, and then we've dry brushed over it with our base color, and then three subsequently lighter colors. And what you can see here is what we've been able to achieve is a lot of depth and a lot of color variation in what would otherwise just be a single tone, monotoned surface. So I'm going to go ahead and stand it up for you. Give you an idea here in the light of what it looks like with those lines that are horizontal on the surface. So it does give a little bit of an impression or illusion that it's got it had forms in it when it was assembled. So we're going to go ahead and leave it at that. I think the color looks pretty good. There's a good variation of color on the surface, and we're going to go ahead and repeat the process for the sand house, the hoist house, the hopper shed, as well as the hopper ramp. Pretty much using the same basic four colors, the khaki tan, the fawn, the sand, and the light buttermilk. And then we'll get into painting our windows and doors, how to treat those with some dry brushing. And then we'll also come back on these structures and we'll paint the roof areas and dry brush those, and we'll put the wash on after we're done dry brushing. A little bit backwards from what we did here, but the end result is pretty pleasing to the eye. So let's go ahead and get those windows painted and come back and show you what we can do with the rest of the concrete structures. So now that we've completed the dry brushing on our hopper shed, and really all of our concrete structures for that matter, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and paint the roof surface a neutral gray. And once again, this is just these inexpensive acrylic craft paints that we're using. Just going to take a brush and go ahead and brush on this neutral gray. You're more than likely going to need 2 coats on this. This goes on pretty thin, and the MDF does a real good job of absorbing the color. So you're likely going to need 2 coats. Just a word of caution out of the gate that you will need to do this twice to get a good coat of coverage on it. And a couple of things we want to do when we do this: we want to make sure we capture the edge with the color. So not only the large surface on the top, but also the edge of the MDF as well, down the side and along this edge here. I wouldn't worry too much about getting up underneath the eaves. If you remember correctly, we painted that with that khaki tan in the very beginning. So I'm just gonna go ahead and apply this coat here to the hopper shed. I'm also going to do the same for the hoist house, the sand house, and the sloped sides on the coaling tower as well. So we got the roofs on all 3 structures painted, and I got a little overzealous here and started in without before I turned the camera on. So basically what I did is I put a piece of masking tape up here on the top tower, and then also on the side here, basically where we go from a flat surface to the beveled surface, and then also here on this flat to bevel transition as well. So I've got 2 coats of paint up here, so I'm going to go ahead and pull this off for now so that I can get the paint on this surface down here to this seam, and then we'll have this neutral gray on top of all of our roof surfaces. And I'm also going to go ahead and put neutral gray down here on the foundation. Just not even going to bother to mask it, just paint it by hand so we can get that gray color down here on the foundation. And I'll be back with that momentarily. Now that the neutral gray is completely painted on our coaling tower and our 3 outbuildings, coaling tower, the roof, and the foundation, the next thing we want to do is we want to put some lamp black into our coal hopper. This is the coal ramp where the hopper shed sits on. We just want to create a dark area here so that when you look into it, it appears as though it's filled with coal and it's deep, and it's creating a lot of shadows. So we're just going to do that with some lamp black. Just going to paint the interior of both of these cavities. The other thing that we need to paint black on our coaling tower are the 2 coal bucket ramp supports. These 2 pieces here, we're going to also paint those lamp black. And then there's one more component, all of the brackets that hold the bucket tracks in place. We're going to paint those black as well. But let's go ahead and do that now, and then I'll be back momentarily. Now that we've been able to get 2 coats of the neutral gray on the 3 buildings, including the coaling tower as the 4th building, what we need to do is go back in and dry brush this dark gray color. So as I mentioned earlier, we're going to actually reverse the process. We're going to dry brush this roof, and then we're going to come back with a little turpenoid and some ivory black oil paint and tone it down. So just like we've done before, I've got a brush here that's got a medium resistance on the bristles. It's about 1 inch wide. Again, using just these inexpensive acrylic paints from the craft store. I've got slate gray and gray sky. As you can see, they are 2 progressively lighter colors off of that neutral gray. So just get started. In this dry brushing exercise, we want to pull the color down from the peak. This is just representing wear on the roof from rain. We're not trying to replicate the forms used to build the structure, but instead, in this instance, we're just trying to replicate some weathering from these buildings being out in the weather, the rain and the snow. And once again, no random no repeating patterns, just a random pattern. Always pulling the brush down. Then we can do the just grab the edges real quick. These edges really don't matter that much. Once the structure is in place on the layout, probably going to be the last place people are going to look. But in the spirit of doing it right. And then once we have our slate gray on, we can come in with our gray sky. And this one we want to make sure that we get all the paint off as much paint off the bristles as possible. We just want to be very, very subtle with this this lighter color. And it's okay to catch that ridge line on the peak. Like I said, we're going to come back in here with some black oil wash later. It'll help tone that down. And we're going to go ahead and repeat the process for the sand house, the hopper shed, as well as the coaling tower. So at this stage we have the dry brushing done on the roof. We did the slate gray and the gray sky on all of our roof surfaces. We also dry brushed the foundation, the 2 foundations on the coaling tower. So what we want to do now is we want to come in with just a real subtle but yet dark black wash. And this is just to tone this surface down. And really what I'm trying to replicate with these surfaces is something that had been coated with maybe some black tar or some type of heavy asphalt type solution that you would paint on top of concrete to help it weather the elements. So we've got our terpenoid in our cup. Just going to take our terpenoid with our black oil paint. I'm just using ivory black. One thing I don't want to do here is I don't want this wash to run a lot. I'm basically just trying to get a dark surface on top of this roof. And so, as you'll see, the details or the highlights that we dry brushed in there will still stay. But this will just help subdue it a bit. And that's really the look that we're going for. We just want to subdue that dry brush look that we put on there just a few moments ago. And so once we have the oil paint on, we just want to go from the peak and drag it down to till we fall off the edge there. And this will prevent any edge strokes from being present. And again, we're looking for random, so if some things pop up, it's okay. It's just going to add some interest to the surface. Trying to avoid these dark black marks on the peak, or on the ridge rather. And so that right there looks pretty good. See if I can bring this closer to the camera so you can get an idea of what that looks like color wise. We're just going to go ahead and repeat this with the hopper shed and the sand house and also the coaling tower. And when we have that done, I'll be right back. So as we apply the wash to the coaling tower, one thing that we definitely want to have in hand is a paper towel or a napkin, so that if we have any excess wash run down over this mask surface, we can wipe it up before it leaves a mark. And the reason for that is we're just trying to isolate this wash to this gray area that we painted on the sloped roofs, and not have it run out onto the concrete, the sand, and khaki tan color that we created earlier. And so I'm just using this. Really, the brush is wet with terpenoid, but it's not running all over the place. And so, that's just to prevent it from running down over the edge of that tape and onto that tan concrete look. Just looking for something random, non-repeating. We'll go with that. And we'll go and turn it around here so you can see the other side as we do that. More terpenoid. And you may have to, or you may want to, do this treatment a couple times after each subsequent layer or filter dries, just to add some interest in the surface. This is just to subdue that dry brush that we did earlier. It's one of the effects that I used on the model that we used for the advertising. So just to be sure, I'm just going to go through here and wipe this off. Make sure this doesn't run down on our other color. I'm going to go ahead and finish this process on the other two sides, and then I'll be right back. So we finished spray painting our windows. Again, we used a Rust-Oleum spruce green out of a spray can. And once that dried up, I put a coat of matte clear enamel on it. Again, just to seal the color and to provide just a little bit of texture on the otherwise smooth laser board pieces. So I'm going to leave the windows on the tack board for two reasons. One, it makes it a lot easier to dry brush these when they're stuck down. And two, there's an adhesive backing on the double-sided tape on the back side of all these components. So if I take them off, it's going to pull that backing off, expose that adhesive, and until I'm ready for it, I'm just going to wait. So the two acrylic colors I'm using are light avocado and desert cactus. I've chosen these because they're progressively lighter than our base color. And we're just going to do our dry brush, same as we've done in just about every step so far. Put our paint on, wipe our paint off, and then just go in with just a real light dry brush on this color. You can of course make your windows any color you want. I've just decided to go with green so we can get away from some of the other tones that we have on the structure itself. And you want to go ahead and do this to all the windows with this light avocado. For the sake of the video, I'm not going to make you watch me dry brush all these. So then we go in with our desert cactus. Wipe the paint off the bristles there. And we're just going to go in with a real light touch on that. You'll see how this this desert cactus will make it pop because it's so much lighter than the base color. And that's about all we're going to do. Again, we'll do that to all the windows, but let me get that a little bit closer to the camera so you can see the effect that it has on those window pieces. We're just going to go ahead and finish this up for all the doors and windows, and this way we'll be able to continue with assembling our structures. So here we have all of our doors and windows dry brushed. See if I can get some of that glare off of there for you. Basically what it's done for us is it's our spruce green is our dark background, especially in these panels. Then the light avocado just lightened it up a little bit, created that darker shadow inside these panels here. And then the desert cactus just really hit the high spots on the windows and doors. And so once you get this up against the surface of the concrete structures, really makes a nice impact. Let me just grab, again, like I said, I've got that adhesive on there, so I'll show you what that looks like once we get a couple of those windows mounted on the structures. So just to recap real quick, earlier we talked about painting the two hopper bays black. Just wanted to show you real quick how that really forces a shadow into that space. If you're using Ross or Gargrave's track, what I've done on for my model is I place that Gargrave's track on here. I double up the tie on that center piece of concrete, and then I bring my ties right up to the edge. And these ties in here, I just break those out, and that's basically so that you can create the illusion of that hopper bin being in there. It's probably highly unlikely that you're going to put a locomotive through this hopper shed. So if you want, you could take a Dremel tool and cut that center rail out entirely, just to take that illusion one step further. And then the hopper shed itself, it mounts on top of the hopper ramp, and you've got 3 full pieces of sidewalk here on either side, and just split the difference on that 4th one. And that's basically how the hopper shed and the hopper ramp are designed to go together. And then really the only thing left to do to the hopper shed at this point is assemble the windows and put them in, and the hopper shed and the hopper ramp will be done. You can set that aside. The sand house and the hoist house, they come into play in the instruction manual a little bit closer to the end when it comes to placing the coaling tower on the layout and setting up the rigging for the coal bucket, etc. At this point in the assembly process, we have all of our railings and walkways completed. So instead of making this video go on forever, I'd like to say that what we're going to do at this point is we're going to paint all of these railings and walkways, as well as their matching grates. We're going to paint them black, and I'm just using some flat black paint. I'm actually going to use an airbrush to cover everything. If you don't have access to an airbrush, you can use a rattle can. I would not recommend doing this with the acrylic paints, just because the stuff is thick and there's a lot of fine details, especially the holes that are in the treads on the staircases. They'll get clogged up with that acrylic paint. But again, spray paint or airbrush, just flat black or engine black. And pretty much everything that we're going to add to the structure from this point forward is going to be black. We've already painted our windows and doors with that spruce green and dry brushed them. And at this point, everything else going onto the structure is going to be black. So we'll make mention of that in the instruction manual, but instead of going through every single part individually as we progress through the assembly build, we're just going to go ahead and say that from this point forward, everything detail-wise is going to be painted black. And then we'll come back at the end and we'll show you how to dry brush those all of these black details that are on the structure itself. So at this point in the assembly, you pretty much have all of the detail parts added to the concrete coaling tower. As we said earlier, you want to make sure that all of basically everything you put onto the coaling tower is painted black. And as you can see here, all of the accessories are painted black. We've got our chains on to our sanding pipes. We also have the chains on our coal chutes. Pretty much everything's in place at this point. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and use some of these inexpensive acrylic paints from the craft store. And we're going to use two colors primarily, a neutral gray and then also a lighter color called Gray Sky. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to take this otherwise very flat black color, and we're going to give a little bit of texture to it and make it pop, essentially. And the method we're going to use is dry brushing. So basically you're going to take a brush, and in this instance we're going to use a brush with really soft bristles on it. Not a lot of resistance on those bristles at all. And the reason is because these details are so fine, something with a medium texture would start breaking the glue joints, and that's not something we want to do. So we're just going to go ahead and get started with the dry brushing process on this neutral gray. We'll paint on the brush and then wipe the paint away. And we're just going to use an up and down motion and basically make the details on this on all of these details pop. I'm sorry I've got to do this on an angle. It's just this coaling tower is too tall to fit in the screen. So basically the direction we want to go is up and down so that we capture these details and put the paint where it belongs. And all we're doing is just lightly touching the surface of these details, and that neutral gray color is coming off very lightly. We don't want to overdo it on this. It'll definitely look overdone if you overdo it. We're just going to use this technique on all of these black details. All the handrails. You can stand the coaling tower up and grab the grates. Just put a little bit of detail or a little bit of dry brushing on those grates. They'll pop as well. The sanding pipes, as you can see, just walking down here, applying a little bit of color to it. So you want to do the entire structure in this neutral gray color first, and then come back with an even lighter top coat of the Gray Sky. So give me a few minutes to get this technique applied to the structure, and then I'll come back when we do the Gray Sky and then show you how exactly it makes the details pop. So at this point we've got the neutral gray dry brushed on the black. I've got a coat on the whole on all of the black details. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go in with some gray sky, and we just want to do a really fine dry brushing of the gray sky. This light gray will really help the details pop on this structure. And just again, put some paint on the brush and then wipe it off, and you should be able to see the transformation in the screen here as I go. Whoops. Yeah, that's what you want to try and avoid. You can glue that back on with no problem. But basically just hitting the highlights, things especially like the pulleys and the large spoked pulleys. Those will really pop once you get this this lighter gray color on there. See if I can get a couple close-up shots for you as well when we finish this. So, at any rate, the gray sky, just want to go over everything one more time really lightly, and I'll get some close-up photos of it, or some close-up shots of it when I get it finished, and it'll show you how everything pops. And we'll be right back. So at this point we've gone back over it with that gray sky, and I'll pull the camera off the tripod here in a moment and show you some of the close-ups like in this area here. Try and get the lighting right so you can see how it makes the details really pop on this cooling tower. The other thing that we did is we've got a concrete counterweight that is used as a detail for the bucket here on the side. So this is cast in white resin. I just put a coat of neutral gray all over this. The wire up on top, you can paint that a rusty color if you want, or just black. It's what the string ties to that goes back down to the hoist house. We're just going to apply a real quick dry brush of gray sky on this, just to give it a little bit of textural detail. Don't need to go too crazy on this. The reason I went with neutral gray as the base color is so that it didn't get lost in that tan color, that worn tan color of the concrete structure. So just something like that to give it a little bit of texture so that it doesn't lose its place when it's in position over here on the side where the coal bucket track is. So now we're going to go ahead and put our windows and doors in. We've held off on doing that up to this point, just so that when we dry brush it we don't pick up any of these gray colors on those doors and windows. So we can go ahead and put those on, and really the last couple steps we have left are we have to do the roof on the top tower. We left that roof off intentionally so that we could put in some of the plumbing for the string that goes to the hoist house, piece inside there. At this point, about the only other thing you could do, or that I would do, is put a little bit of streaking effects with maybe some rust running down off of the vertical brackets that hold the walkways in place. That's entirely personal preference if you want to do that. I'm just going to use a little bit of turpenoid and oil paint to create that effect. Not overdo it, just a little bit. Still want this structure to be, you know, it's obviously it was in the steam era, and I'm not looking to over weather it to the point where it would be in the diesel era and completely decrepitated. So at this point we're going to go ahead and finish the assembly, and like I said, come back and just do a couple small touches, which I'll show you. And let me pull the camera off the tripod and show you what some of these details look like with the dry brushing. So I apologize if it's a little bit shaky, but you can see here the contrast in the black walkways with the gray, two lighter shades of gray dry brushing. Also how it makes things like this pulley bracket pop. Show you here these pulleys down here really come to life with the dry brushing. See if I can get this in the right light for you. But it really shows off the detail. And the black paint on the that we painted the surfaces originally really helps to create a shadow in the crevices. So we look here at the staircase and how that pops out with the, you can really see the detail, the holes that are laser cut into the wood in those tread plates really stands out with the dry brushing. And then also up on the top. Can also put, get a little bit of that lighter gray, that gray sky on the tops of your railings. That'll also make those pop as well. Here's our coal bucket, or rather a coal chute. You can see that it's no longer just that boring flat black color. Also did the same dry brushing effect to the sand pipes. Gives them a little bit of texture as well, and some nice color, and the way it helps those pulley brackets pop. So just an idea of what the overall effect of the dry brushing is. Really does a nice job of helping the details stand out. So as one of the final steps we need to do in the assembly process and painting process is this vinyl tubing. So this vinyl tubing represents the vacuum line that takes the dried sand from the sand house through vacuum, brings it up into the coaling tower itself so that it can feed down to the different sand pipes. All we're going to do with this vinyl tubing is, once we've got it cut to length on the bottom and the top, and we've got that 18 gauge multi-conductor wire that actually holds the shape of the vinyl tubing and inserts in the top of the tower and also in the sand house. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and paint that black, and then we'll go back and dry brush it, a little bit of neutral gray and gray sky. Same thing with that nylon washer down here on the bottom. This is just to make sure that the mating surface between the vinyl tubing and the roof is flat. There's a little bit of play in there side to side, so instead of seeing a gap, we put that washer around it. Looks something like a gasket or a seal, and we're going to paint that black and dry brush it as well. And that's pretty much going to be the completion of the coaling tower. One final thing we'll do after that is there's a safety railing that goes around the simulated pit that the bucket falls into to bring the coal up to the tower. The only thing we're going to do is we're going to paint that like a safety yellow, just so it really pops, gives some interest in an otherwise dark area. You've got the hopper shed that sits here on top of the hopper ramp. It's kind of dark in the back, and you know, with having coal kind of strewn around there and on the tracks, having that yellow safety railing will really draw the eye into that area where there is quite a bit of detail. And that pretty much concludes our coaling tower painting video. We hope that you enjoyed the kit, and we hope you enjoyed the assembly process and also the painting. It's a great looking model, really kind of a centerpiece of any type of engine service facility whatsoever. And until the next kit, keep building and enjoying the trains. Thank you very much for watching along, and hopefully you'll learn something. So finish that dry brush effect on this neutral gray for the foundations for the hoist house and the sand house. And then the final thing that we did is this. This is the safety railing that goes around the coal bucket and the coal bucket track on the back of the coaling tower. As you can see, it's got these pieces here where it sits down over top of the foundation that the coaling tower rests on. We just painted those a safety yellow. There is another railing that goes here, but you need to put this in position and then put that other railing on the back of it. And we'll recommend you do that once the coaling tower is actually mounted to the surface that it's going to be sitting on, tracks laid underneath it, it's ballasted, and etc. So that's pretty much the last steps that we have. We're going to go into the final step and wrap up the video.